We are continuing our Wednesday night theme on prayer, and tonight I would like for you to turn to Genesis chapter number 18. My subject is praying for your city. Praying for your city. Now, there are two things that happen in Genesis chapter 18. This is an incident in the life of Abraham. The first 22 verses deal with three angels coming to visit Abraham, announcing to him that he and Sarah were going to have a baby. The rest of the chapter, 23 to 33, deal with Abraham praying for God to spare Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, I suspect you may never have heard a sermon on that. You've probably heard a sermon on the text. We've all heard a lot of preaching through our lifetime on God's judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah, which is by fire, which is an illustration, according to the little book of Jude, of what God's going to do again at the end of the Great Tribulation. But what about Abraham before all that happened? He prayed for God not to do that. So I want to talk to you for a little bit about praying for our city. The New Testament counterpart would be 1 Timothy 2, always praying for all men, for kings that are in authority, and goes right on down the line. The purpose being that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life. As Christians, our home is Dublin, Stephenville, Huckabee. It's really in our best interest to always pray for our city so that we can lead a quiet life, and we have been able to lead a quiet life. The biggest frustration we have, doesn't matter where you live, is taxes. But we've been able to lead a quiet life, and we have the Bible clearly gives us an obligation to pray for the cities where we live. Now, the heart of there's two verses that's the heart of the lesson, and that is in chapter 18, verse 23, and, verse 22 and 23. 22 closing out the first half of the chapter, 23 beginning the last half of the chapter. And the men, that is the three angels, turned their faces from thence and went towards Sodom, but Abraham stood yet before the Lord. And Abraham drew near and said, Wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Now, in the first 22 chapters, Abraham is sitting in his tent, his home, in the door of the tent being open in the heat of the day. And three men come to see him. Two angels and the Lord, or three angels, depending on how you interpret. But three heavenly visitors. And in good Middle Eastern decor, Abraham greets them and welcomes them and immediately offers to cook them a meal. And he told Sarah about it and got one of his servants to get some meat, and they prepared a meal. And after the meal, the angels announced to Abraham that the time of life, they were late in life, that they were going to have a baby. And of course, if you'll remember the story, Sarah was in the tent and overheard it and laughed. And And then the angel said, yeah, Sarah, you did laugh when she got confronted. She denied it, and the angel said, no, you did. And that was the end of that discussion. In that discussion also, though it isn't much explained, apparently obvious from the context, they announced to Abraham that God is going to destroy that whole area of plain, Sodom and Gomorrah and all the little towns around there with fire. That leads us into the second half of the chapter, in that Abraham had a brother that died who had a son named Lot, who Abraham raised. And the study of Lot's very interesting. Lot just made a lifetime of bad decisions. Abraham had a lifetime of making good decisions. The last of Lot's bad decisions was when Abraham, who had hundreds of servants and thousands of head of stock, and Lot also had a lot of servants and a lot of stock, and the range where they were living got too crowded, and the herdsmen were fighting, and Abraham said to Lot, look, we be brethren, we shouldn't be fighting. Let's do this. If you'll choose this direction, then I'll go in that direction. If you choose that direction, I'll go in this direction. So Lot, the scheming man of the world that he had become, looked over there and he saw a lot of barren desert land. He looked over here and he saw this fertile plain. And he said, I'll take the fertile plain. And Abraham did not demur. He said, okay. So Abraham went that way, and Lot and his people went that way. The problem was in that fertile plain was Sodom and Gomorrah. And it wasn't long before you hear of Lot living in Sodom and Gomorrah, an exceedingly immoral city of tremendous sexual perversion. And before you know it, he even sat in the gate, which means he even got on the city council. So, years of bad decision, finally he ends up in Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, Abraham, who loved his nephew, right? If you're raising, that's a nephew, right? Okay. He loved his nephew, and he didn't want to see that happen. And so this is where my text comes in, this impassionate prayer of Abraham to God. And he started with 50. If there's 50 people there, God said, okay, I'll spare the land. 40, okay, I'll spare them. 30, okay, I'll spare them. And finally got down to 10, and God said, okay, Abraham, if there's 10 righteous people there, I'll spare the city. Well, of course, we know the story. There wasn't. Lot never influenced anybody for Christ. Worldly, greedy, covetous people don't make a very good influence for the cause of Christ. So, the prayer. One thing I want you to notice, fine as some of the angels went on, and those were the same two that ended up saving Lot's life, pulling him back inside the door, and yet the one that stayed with Abraham, you notice the sweet fellowship and the prayer and what the Lord revealed to Abraham one-on-one that he would not have learned any other way but spending a lot of time alone with God. There's a verse that says, the secret of the Lord is with them that fear him. John 15:15, Jesus said, all things that I've heard of my Father have I made known unto you. Now, I could spend a month in this chapter, but my purpose tonight is just this one thought, praying for our city. And there are 3 or 4 things in the text that I want to bring out. First of all, just the announcement to Abraham's ears that God was going to overthrow that whole region, those cities and all the little towns around it. And he had family there, just the burden of such an announcement coming. And by the way, God has already made such an announcement to us. Has He not? Did He not promise there's another worldwide judgment coming? Did He not already say how that's going to be? He's going to burn it up. Did He not say burning up Sodom and Gomorrah was an illustration of what is yet going to happen? Well, first of all, there are three great statements. First of all, God said to Abraham, the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great. Now, all that people could hear was the business and the revelry and the laughter and the playing and the merchants and the hammers and the building. But God heard something completely different. The cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great. In the distance, Abraham heard nothing, but God heard a cry. God heard the cry of sin and of oppression, of lust, of violence, of abused maidens, of forsaken children, of beaten wives. See, in God's ears, each sin has a cry. Wonder what God hears when He listens to what's going on in our cities. I dare say, not much different. And so, first of all, the statement, the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great. The second statement is, He said, I will go down now and see. Now, you understand, God doesn't have to come and see. God knows all, sees all, He's immutable, He's all wisdom, all power. God knows it all. But this is a statement so that you and I can understand how God operates. God investigates to find out the truth before He executes judgment. That's why Abraham said, will the God of all the earth not do right? See, God sees all. God misses nothing. Hebrews 10:31. All things are naked and open unto the eyes of Him with whom we have to do. The fragrant, unchecked sin of our society today. You know, most of us my age or even close to my age, we scarce can believe what change our beloved country has gone through in the last 60 years. There's some very sobering verses in the Bible. The nation that sinneth, it shall die. Be sure your sin will find you out. The wages of sin is death. When sin is finished, it bringeth forth death. God here is a totally different cry. And then thirdly, He makes a statement, if not, I will know. Ominous words. If not what? If it isn't right, if you find sins, I will know. Ominous words. Abraham said, wilt thou destroy? And again, what is there that God does not know? Psalms 139, I don't have time to go there, but God knows when we go to bed, God knows when we get up, God knows every breath we take, God knows when we sit down in a chair, God knows when we leave a house. God knows everything. There's nothing about anybody He doesn't see. I will know. In other words, God does know. Those are ominous statements that loom over Stephenville, Texas, folks, and over Dublin, Texas, and over Huckabee, and over wherever. So, here's what God said. Now, I want us to look at Abraham's response. What moved Abraham? What an impression this made, and then we'll get into his prayer. The impression this made on Abraham, well, first of all, it so stirred him that he begins an impassioned plea to avert the coming judgment. Do we plead with God for sinners before judgment comes? We sure should. Two things moved Abraham. Number one, natural anxiety for his family. By the way, by now, Abraham had not seen Lot for over 20 years. He raised him. This was a natural love. You know, we get to a point in our lives that the older we get, the longer we live, the more our kids almost seem to be off in the distance somehow, some way. But we never stop praying for them. We stop praying for them the day we take our last breath. Remember what Jesus said to the demoniac who wanted to, after he got healed and the demons got cast out, he wanted to go to Jesus, and Jesus said, no, you go home and tell their friends what God has done for you. First of all, there was natural, filial desires there, but there's something even more important there. It's very important. The honor of God's name. The honor of God's name was more important to Abraham than even his love for the family. If God destroyed the righteous with the wicked, what would the heathen nations around say about the character of God? To a true believer, the character of God is very important. Whatever else I pray for this church and for y'all every day, I pray more than anything else in the world that God's name would always be protected, honored in the life of this church and in our lives. That's more important than anything else in the world. This was really the heart passion of what drew Abraham to such prayer. By the way, it was of the Lord too, John 17:4. I have glorified thee on the earth. And then later on, Paul wrote in Philippians 2:5, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. So, now for just a few minutes, I want us to look at the prayer, and I've got some basic observations about this one-on-one between Abraham and the Lord, and Abraham just got this word from the Lord of what God was fixing to do, and his family's down there, and he had all kinds of concerns. We could read verse 23 to 33 in 3 minutes, but the actual event took a lot longer. But there's several things in this event of praying for your city. Number one, it was lonely prayer. It says in verse 22, in the last part of it, Abraham stood before the Lord. That wide open desert land. Not another human ear. Only God could hear. And God tells us, when thou prayest, enter into thy closet. And by the way, that could be a wide open. I love to go to the mountains and do that. But when thou prayest, enter into thy closet and shut thy door and pray to thy Father which seeth in secret, and he will reward thee openly. A famous historical writer many years ago said this, and I want to quote it directly. For what are men better than sheep or goats that nourish a blind life within the brain, if knowing God, they lift not hands of prayer, both for themselves and those who call them friends. Pray for our city. Lonely prayer. Number two is prolonged prayer. Abraham stood yet before the Lord. That That's an extended time frame. Abraham stood. He wasn't moved. He wasn't standing. Means being still to hear what God says, and being, when you're in your prayer time, that's standing yet before the Lord. Intercession takes time. Praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, and watching up with all perseverance and supplication for all saints. Jesus, rising up a great while before day, went out into the mountain to pray. It was prolonged prayer. Number 3 was humble prayer. He said in verse 27, "Behold now, I have taken upon me to speak to the Lord, which I am but dust and ashes." Oh, I like that. We do not demand or command God. We bow at His feet. See, the nearer we get to God, the more we're conscious of our unworthiness. And it says in the Proverbs, "He forgetteth not the cry of the humble." And I quoted this verse, I remember it last week in Psalm 57:15. "To this man will I look, to him that is humble." He was not bartering with God. Now, God was drawing him on, obviously, but he was just a humble, broken man, pouring out his heart to God. He was concerned about his family. He was concerned about his God's reputation. And yes, he was concerned about lost souls. Number 4, this prayer was based on Abraham's moral belief, conviction that God had the same moral intuition as himself. In other words, if a fallen man like Abraham could have that compassion for that people, and since Abraham was made in the likeness of God like the rest of us are, even though the image has been greatly defaced by sin, he understood that God, if Abraham so cared, he believed that God would infinitely more so care. The first word of the Great Commission is go. We should possess our souls and be patient and believe and live like God will do right, because He is righteous. And then number 5, this is a prayer of perseverance. When you count it down, it's 6 times. He started at 50 and went down from there. First of all, he apparently knew the spiritual condition of his nephew. He probably had the intuition that Lot hadn't done a whole lot down there in Sodom for the cause of Christ. He'd done a lot for himself, but not the cause of Christ. Let me tell you something, folks. The sins of Sodom and Gomorrah are rife in our cities today, regardless of small or great. The final straw with God is sexual perversion when it's taken outside of the confines of a man and a woman. And it is rampant in our own nation. We need to be men and women of prayer. Remember what Jacob said when he got in a pickle? He got on his face alone with God on the backside of the river after he took his whole family across. And he said, Lord, I will not let thee go except thou bless me. Praying for our city. Here's a great principle in the divine government, God's divine government of the universe. There are some things we don't understand about God. There are infinite things we don't understand about God. We know God is sovereign, we know God orders, controls, etc., all things. But yet there's a human side. And here's something. A whole area could have been saved had there been at least 10 saved people there. Wow. The world doesn't care about us. The world doesn't know and certainly doesn't care about how much the older Christians and churches, we are salt, we are light, we are a savor of death unto death or life unto life. You see, we need to be praying like Abraham for the city where we live, because the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is a token of what is yet to come. Plainly said so in 2 Peter 3:10. Praying for our city. I thought this is a message that would be so appropriate on prayer in view of the greater of what we're trying to do and all the promoting and getting out. I find more and more the best visits I make are the ones that I just run into, not deliberately go out and, we got 20 visits, got 20 cars, we're going to go knock on 20 doors. I find that just as you live your daily life, if you'll be aware of it, and if you'll start praying for the city where you live, or if you are, God will put people in your path that need to hear the gospel of the good news. So, praying for our city. And I just trust that the Lord will take this simple study and move our hearts with it to pray for our city as we go to pray. Amen.